this was precisely the same day when just in a couple of hundreds of meters, these clashes between the protesters and the police began because it was everyone perceived that there will be an ultimate dispersal of the protests, and then there will be political processes against them, and that
So
if
this
we
is
don't act in any way, so we are all doomed.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. This August 21st was the 9th year after the massive chemical attack with sarin gas by Assadist forces in Syria. It was marked in various ways. Responding to calls from the White Helmets, Promoting Enduring Peace held a Zoom panel where people lit candles. Here are a couple of screenshots from that event. Now some reflections on chemical weapons by Syrian-American Dr. Zahar Salul on August 24th.
As we all know, that chemical weapons have been used to poison some of the political opposition people in North Korea, where it was used by Kim Jong-un to poison his half-brother in Malaysia in February 2017 using an agent VX, which is one of the most potent chemical weapons. Also, Russia have been allegedly used as nerve gas, Novichok, one of the most potent nerve gases, to assassinate political opponent, including one of the Russian spies in the UK in 2018, and his daughter in Amesbury, UK, Sergei Skripal. And also that incident of usage of the Novichok has led to the death of other two UK citizens. And recently, just 1 year ago, in August 2020, it was used, Novichok, to assassinate or poison Alexei Navalny, who's one of the opposition leaders in Russia. So the fact that the world has witnessed not only one time or two times, as you have mentioned, but 349 times uses of chemical weapons in Syria, 349 times. 90% of them were done or happened after the red line. 98% of them, the culprit was the Syrian regime. And they used sarin gas, they used chlorine gas, which is a choking agent, and they used also mustard gas. So three classes of chemical weapons. I still remember the story of the family that died in Sarmin in March of 2015 when chlorine bombs were used. And the family was living in a basement, and they inhaled large amount of chlorine, and they were admitted to a hospital that was supported by my organization. And the doctors and the nurses struggled to resuscitate them. They had very limited means. They did not have PPEs, protective gear. Some of the doctors also fell ill at the time. And the three children died, including Muhammad, who was 1 year old, and Aisha, who was 2 years old, and her sister, Sarah, who was 3 years old, in addition to the parents and the grandparent. These things are very painful, and the truth has to be revealed. When chemical weapons used 349 times in the 21st century, That means it was normalized. There was no justice to the victims. My friend, Dr. Sanoufi, was in Ain Terma in August 21st, 2013, in the Ghouta massacre. He was the head doctor in a small hospital that has 20 beds. Within a few hours in the morning of August 21st, 9 years ago, he had 700 patients, all of them suffocating, gasping for air. He had very limited means to treat them. He had to decide which patient he can take care of and which patient that he has to let go to die. By the morning, 444 patients died because of exposure to sarin gas. 2/3 of them were children. We assume that the world know, but they don't. Just recently, we had a discussion with one of the policymakers in the United States, congressman, very prominent, and we were telling him that this is the 9th anniversary of the Ghouta massacre, and he had no information whatsoever about the Ghouta massacre, how many people were died, how many attacks happened in Syria. So I think a panel like this, where and I thank we exist for this panel, is educational. We have to keep the truth. We have to educate people. We have to make sure that chemical weapons is not used again in the world, in a war or outside of the war. And without accountability, without justice, chemical weapons will be used and have been used by dictators, by authoritarian regimes, by extremist groups, by criminals to assassinate people, to use it against populations. And that's why it's important to maintain the truth, to educate people, and also to have accountability for the victims of chemical weapons in Syria.
Syria was briefly in the news as the U.S. bombed Iranian forces that were near the American Tanf base on Syrian land. What the U.S. did not do was help the nearby 10,000 hungry and ill Syrians who had helped fight ISIS or had run away from Assad. Palestinian prisoner Khalil Awawdeh has been on hunger strike for months.
And in the occupied West Bank, a Palestinian hunger striker held by Israel is in critical condition and could die at any moment, according to the doctor who examined him earlier this week. Khalil Awawdeh has been on a hunger strike since March in protest of his so-called administrative detention, the Israeli policy of holding Palestinians without charge for up to years at a time. Awawdeh spoke to reporters from his hospital bed Wednesday.
My health condition is extensively deteriorating. I feel I am internally collapsing. I feel that my body is consuming itself internally in a strange manner.
On Sunday, Israel's Supreme Court rejected an appeal by Awawdeh's lawyers demanding his immediate release due to his failing health. His family called the court's decision a death sentence. This is Khalil's father, Mohammed Awawdeh.
When we first saw his picture on his lawyer's camera, we were surprised and shocked over his health condition. He now weighs 38 kilograms. He used to weigh 86. So what can he be other than skin and bones?
Awawdeh is protesting his status as an administrative detainee. As explained on Democracy Now!, it means arrest with no charges. Never a trial. You can be held that way for years. The Palestinian prisoners group Samadun says currently 650 Palestinians are jailed without charge or trial among the 4,650 Palestinian political prisoners. By the way, as Gideon Levy noted in Haaretz, former Israeli Prime Minister Begin in 1951 said this about administrative detention. The law is a Nazi law. It's tyrannical, it's immoral, and an immoral law is an illegal law. Of course, he wasn't talking about Palestinians, but members of a Jewish underground. But still, what he said was right. And this news about health issues and women's rights.
Back in the United States, Louisiana state bond commissions withholding nearly $40 million in funding for flood control in New Orleans after the state's Republican Attorney General objected to city officials' opposition to Louisiana's strict abortion ban. The funding is meant to pay for drainage pumps critical to protecting New Orleans from flooding and rising sea levels due to the climate crisis. Attorney General Jeff Landry successfully pushed commissioners to withhold the funds as punishment after New Orleans City Council passed a resolution asking law enforcement officers not to enforce Louisiana's near-total abortion ban, which does not include exemptions for rape or incest. This comes after a Baton Rouge resident who was 10 weeks pregnant was denied an abortion at a Louisiana hospital, even though an ultrasound showed her fetus was developing without a skull. The condition, known as acrania, does not appear on a list of accepted conditions for an abortion in Louisiana.
The treatment of that woman is hideous. The fetus has been diagnosed with a fatal condition, acrania, meaning the fetus will not develop a skull. It will not live. So the forced birth worshippers in Louisiana, who dominate the government there, expect this woman to carry the dying fetus for 8 more months to give birth to it and to watch it die. And they do this in the name of religion. They say it's God's will. How cruel and degenerate. Very interesting, a New York Times video called How to Fall Out of Love with Your Lawn. Lawn grass is America's biggest crop, and it's fairly useless. It's also connected with bad effects for the climate and for those who spread the toxic chemicals on it to keep it emerald green. Promoting Enduring Peace links to the article in its Climate and Nature Resources section. And do see the video I did for PEP about using all-electric equipment to replace gas-powered toxic chemical belchers. The link to it is on PEP's homepage in the same section with the PEP petition on gas-powered equipment. This is brave Marina Ovsyannikova, the Russian TV journalist who protested the war in Ukraine. Here she is in court being prosecuted for having discredited the army. She holds up a sign reading, "Let dead children haunt your dreams." Note, cops immediately rushing to cover her words. Now more of my interview with Denys Pilash from Kyiv, Ukraine. He was talking about 2014 in Kyiv in the weeks before President Yanukovych fled. Now he gets into talking about police brutality under Yanukovych and the bid for that president to make all dissent illegal.
And of course, here comes this complicated part, because when you have 500,000 or 1 million people on the streets, you really have this huge diversity of people, both from Kyiv and from other regions. And actually, these events, they were not just in Kyiv, they were throughout the country. and you have a really more inclusive space. And in this different, when we and our allies did different interventions with leftist, feminist, progressive agenda on some of these like smaller everyday standings there. Sometimes we were confronted by the not so numerous but active far right that tried to like push the leftists out of the protest. But actually, there were lots of initiatives inside this spontaneous movement that were mostly run by left-wing people. Like there was this, some point the police started to detain and kidnap people from the hospital, the same people who have been mistreated, who have been beaten up. And then the police comes to the hospital and takes them to the custody or to unknown places. And so there was this so-called hospital guard that activists were actually guarding. They were helping the injured people to get to the hospital, and they were like doing the full day guard, not them to be kidnapped by the police, and it was mostly done by the leftists.
This is let's say December of 13, or is this January of 14?
This is December, January,
okay,
February. So this was like almost throughout. So, but the situation was escalating, and there was another milestone on the 16th of January when the parliament, like controlled by the ruling party of Regions, it pushed through a package of laws that they were effectively outlawing any kind of independent activity. That meant also that that freedom of assembly, freedom of organization, freedom of protest, freedom of speech, freedom of union organizing that existed, it will be severely restricted to this like authoritarian way. And after this point, it was again something that that led to this situation where either the protest wins or the government suppresses everyone, notwithstanding with their political affiliation or attitude towards even this particular protest. But if they are not controlled by the state and by the ruling party, so they will be effectively outlawed and persecuted for this.
So what was the reaction of people to this these proposed laws? Were they proposed, or did they actually pass these?
They were passed through the parliament on this day, and well, actually, this was the start when, up to this moment, the Maidan protests were mostly peaceful. So you had a huge number of people who were gathering there. There was like the people who were staying there in the tents, so it was like winter, and but they were keeping the control over the square, and they were doing all the infrastructure and feeding those who were joining and so on. And you had the people who were joining this bigger protests. But from this moment, it seems that this is a dead end. That it now means that the authorities, the political power, the state, the government, they will start political persecutions of the protesters, and that actually that opposition, those guys who afterwards came to power after Maidan, that they have no strategy, no viable strategy what to do in this case. So they were even more discredited in the eyes of the general protesting population. And this led to these first major clashes in the Hrushevskoye Street that were actually more like an act of some desperation. So they started on the 19th of January, like 3 days after, and I know it precisely because that's the day when every year we commemorate victims of far-right violence, because at this day, two of our comrades, the labor lawyer, not labor, but human rights in general lawyer, Stanislav Markelov, and the Crimean journalist Anastasia Baburova, who were both very prominent left-wing anti-fascist figures in Russia. They were killed by Russian neo-Nazis. So throughout the region, there were these days when we commemorate and also say no to this political and far right violence. And this was precisely the same day when, just in a couple of hundreds of meters, these clashes between the protesters and the police began, because it was, everyone perceived that there will be an ultimate dispersal of the protest, and then there will be political processes against them, and that so if we don't act in any way, so we are all doomed.
So this is January 19th. The old tactics seem to be coming to a dead end, and then there's some violence is starting. Okay, so then what happens? We come to February, where there's tremendous violence.
Yeah, so at the same time, the government loses its legitimacy, and I mentioned these protests throughout the regions, like in central, northern, and the western parts of Ukraine mostly, but they were also smaller in eastern and southern. You have a situation when the government actually starts to lose also some effective control. So it's again, like in many revolts and revolutions of the past, some point when this all the police forces and all the brute force that is manifested by those in power, it cannot suppress discontent that is so widespread that it prevails. So actually, at this point, there were already first protesters killed, and there was this. Then there were trying to get some political negotiating and mediating the crisis, but ultimately Yanukovych gave another order to disperse the Maidan Square, disperse the protesters from there, and this final clash with the riot police, it resulted to these shootings. And again, there are lots of conspiracy theories and some explanations that try to invoke some third side and so on. But there is a fact that the majority of those people who have been killed on the Institutska Street, the street that goes from Maidan Square to the governmental area, they were killed by police bullets, by the riot police bullets, and that, like, obviously the government and the riot police were the main culprits for everything that happened. So
you wait, but let me stop you here. So talk a minute about the conspiracy theories. One hears in the United States, some people say, oh, it's so uncertain who shot who. It might have been the protesters sending people with guns to shoot at themselves so they would get more sympathy. I mean, we hear that conspiracy theory at times.
The first bullets were, it's proven that they were shot by the riot police. And the vast majority, you can just look at the data about these people, who were killed. So, for instance, we lost an anarchist guy whom many of us got acquainted during this protest. He was actually a non-violence advocate, more of a narco-pacifist. He was called Serhiy Kemsky, and he originally comes from Crimea. Actually, he was one of the most peaceful persons you can imagine. Yes, he was among those who were killed by these police bullets.
How many were killed in February? Shot?
So we can check the precise number, but it was like it was less than 100, but I think it's less than 90 people who were killed.
Mm-hmm. We regret not mentioning this last week, but August 23rd was 95 years after the judicial execution of anarchists Sacco and Vanzetti in Boston, Massachusetts. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.